There is a moment. Most people never notice it, when a yard goes quiet in a way that feels wrong. Not the silence of a winter morning, not the stillness before rain. Something else. A specific kind of emptiness that your nervous system registers before your conscious mind does. You step outside. You scan the trees. The feeder hangs there, still, and you realize the birds are gone. And the strange part? Some part of you already knew. What most people don't realize is that the relationship between you and the birds in your yard is far older, far more layered, and far more emotionally complex than anyone talks about. And the moment you stop feeding them, even for just 24 hours, something begins. Something that scientists are only now beginning to understand. Something that, once you know it, will change the way you look at every bird you ever see again. This is not a story about birds. This is a story about what happens when a living system loses something it didn't know it was depending on. It begins the moment you set down the bag of seed and walk away. The first hour is deceptive. Nothing looks different. The chickadees still flicker through the branches. A nuthatch moves head first down the bark of the oak like gravity is optional. A cardinal lands somewhere nearby, a flash of impossible red against the gray of the morning. Everything appears normal. Everything appears fine. But underneath that appearance, something has already shifted. Research from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has mapped the feeding patterns of birds with a precision that feels almost surreal. What they found was that birds don't just visit feeders randomly. They operate on internal schedules so exact that ornithologists describe them as biologically embedded. Your feeder, your specific feeder, in your specific yard, has already been assigned a time slot in the cognitive map of every bird that visits it. They know when you fill it. They know how full it gets. They know the sound your back door makes, and they know what that sound means. Within the first hour of your feeder being empty, the birds arriving on schedule are doing something remarkable. They are not panicking. They are not flying away immediately. They are waiting. And they are watching. And this is the part most people never think about. Birds remember, not in the vague, instinctive way we often imagine, in a way that is specific, personal, and almost unsettling in its precision. A study from the University of Cambridge found that certain species, jays, crows, chickadees, can remember not just where food was, but when it was there and who was present when they found it. Scientists call this episodic-like memory, the ability to recall specific events in time, not just patterns. It is one of the cognitive abilities once believed to be exclusively human. What that means for your feeder is this. The bird that lands on the empty perch this morning is not experiencing a vague sense of disappointment. It is experiencing something closer to recognition. It remembers yesterday. It remembers the day before. It is comparing what it sees now to what it knows. And somewhere in that small, extraordinary brain, a question is forming. The yard hasn't changed. The feeder is still there. But something is different. And the birds are paying attention in a way that should genuinely astonish you. By the second or third hour, the behavior begins to shift. The visits become shorter, more frequent, but briefer. The birds are making what researchers call foraging assessments, rapid cost-benefit calculations that happen in fractions of a second, based on memory, current conditions, and risk. They haven't abandoned the feeder yet, but they are beginning to weigh it differently. Here is what this looks like from outside. A bird lands, pauses, leaves, returns, pauses again. There is something almost anxious in the rhythm of it. And there is, because anxiety, or something neurologically very close to it, is exactly what is happening. The biological stress response in birds operates on a hair trigger. It has to. In a world where a moment of inattention can be the last moment, the nervous system learns to treat uncertainty as danger. An empty feeder where food should be is, in the language of a bird's nervous system, a signal that something has gone wrong. The environment has become unpredictable. And unpredictability, to a small animal that lives outside in all weather, is a form of threat. What researchers discovered next surprised even them. The birds don't just change their behavior at the feeder. They change their behavior everywhere. A study tracking GPS-tagged birds found that when a reliable food source disappears, even temporarily, the bird's entire home range expands. They begin covering more ground, flying farther, taking more risks. And as they take more risks, they encounter more danger. This is the part of the story that catches people off guard. The act of stopping feeding isn't neutral. It creates a ripple. The birds that depended on your feeder, even partially, even just as a supplement to their natural foraging, are now moving through a slightly more dangerous version of their world because of an absence they didn't expect. But here is the hidden layer beneath that. Because the birds moving farther aren't moving randomly. They're heading to the yards where the feeders are still full. There is a concept in ecology called a resource hub, a point in a landscape where food, shelter, water, or safety concentrates. Your yard, with its feeder and its trees and its familiarity, has functioned as a resource hub in the invisible geography of your neighborhood's birds. You may not have thought of it that way, but the birds did. And resource hubs don't disappear quietly. When one goes offline, the network adjusts. The birds from your yard don't scatter randomly into the wilderness. They follow a cognitive map, one built over weeks or months of careful observation, toward the next nearest point of reliability. Your neighbor's feeder, the park 3 blocks over, the old woman on the corner who never misses a morning. What this means is strange and beautiful, and a little haunting. The birds in your yard know your neighborhood better than you do. They have mapped it. They have ranked its resources. They hold in memory a kind of emotional geography that includes your yard, your feeder, your patterns. And they are already preparing to route around you. But they haven't given up on you yet. Not in the first 24 hours. Around hours 6 or 7, something subtle happens that most people would never detect without watching very carefully. The birds begin to communicate about your feeder. Not in the way humans communicate. Not with deliberate intent to share information. But bird alarm and recruitment calls, the sounds that signal food presence or absence, travel through a yard with a precision that functions like language. When a chickadee finds an empty feeder, the calls it makes are subtly different from the calls it makes when food is present. These differences are measurable. Other birds register them. And the birds already in your trees, the ones waiting, the ones watching, they hear those calls and update their expectations accordingly. This is the moment the feeder shifts from active resource to memory. And the emotional weight of that shift, if we allow ourselves to feel it, is genuinely strange. There is a way in which the birds in your yard have been building a kind of trust with you. Not conscious, not sentimental, not anything like what humans mean by trust, but functionally identical, a pattern of reliability, a learned expectation, and on hour 6 of day 1, that expectation begins to waver. By midday, the dynamic has changed completely. The birds who visited your feeder this morning have already redistributed. Some have found other food sources. Some are waiting in trees farther from your yard. Some, the regulars, the ones who have been coming for months, are still nearby, still making occasional passes, still checking, hoping. If hope is a word we are allowed to use for creatures whose inner lives remain a mystery even to scientists. And here is the thing that should sit with you. The birds that rely most heavily on your feeder aren't the ones who have the most options. They are often the ones with the fewest. The bird that visits your feeder every single morning, the one you recognize by its slightly bent tail feather or the unusual amount of white on its wing, that bird has chosen your yard because it works, because it's reliable, because it is, in the vocabulary of survival, safe. When the feeder goes empty, that bird doesn't have a backup plan you don't know about. It has the same cognitive map every other bird has, but the map leads back to you. And when you aren't there, it keeps returning to the last known good location, hoping the calculation has changed. This behavior has a name in behavioral ecology. It is called site fidelity. And watching it in action, watching a bird return again and again to a place that has stopped giving it what it needs, is one of those small, quiet experiences that has a way of lodging itself permanently in the mind. By afternoon, if you were to walk outside and look carefully, you would notice that your yard is not simply quiet. It is held in a kind of suspension. The birds that remain nearby are not resting. They are waiting with a biological urgency that their stillness disguises. Every few minutes, one nicks another pass, lands, looks, leaves. And if you were to walk back inside and fill the feeder, right now, this moment, what would happen next would feel almost like a scene from something you would not fully believe if it happened to you. Within minutes, sometimes within seconds, they come back. Researchers have documented this response in careful detail. The speed at which birds return to a refilled feeder after a brief absence is not explained by random search behavior. It is too fast, too targeted, too consistent across individuals. What it suggests is that some of the birds never truly left. They remained in the territory, in the trees, in the edges of the yard, watching, waiting for the signal that things had returned to normal. They were not gone, they were watching you. But what if you don't refill it? What if the 24 hours passes and the feeder stays empty into the second day? This is where the story changes in a way that feels genuinely important to understand. A study published in the journal Animal Behavior found that birds adjust their internal reliability ratings for food sources over time. A feeder that was consistently stocked for months builds what researchers describe as a high reliability expectation. When that feeder goes empty, the reliability rating doesn't drop immediately. The birds persist, returning, checking, waiting, for longer than you might expect. The memory of reliability creates a buffer of patience. But that buffer has a limit. And when it reaches that limit, something shifts that is much harder to reverse than you might think. The feeder moves from the primary map to the secondary map, from a resource hub to a maybe. And birds who survive by making excellent decisions with incomplete information do not spend long on maybes. This is the hidden cost. Not the immediate one, but the slow one. The erosion of trust that happens in the cognitive landscape of a creature that has been paying attention to you for longer than you have been paying attention to it. There is a moment, somewhere in the late afternoon of that first empty day, when the light changes the way it does in autumn. Gold and lateral and slightly melancholy, and the yard that has been busy every morning for months sits completely still. And, if you are the kind of person who pays attention, you feel it. Something is missing. The yard is the same yard. The trees are the same trees. But the invisible web of small living presences that moved through it every morning, the ones you may not have fully realized you were depending on for something, has shifted away from you. Most people experience this feeling without ever naming it. A vague sense of loss, a yard that looks the same but feels different, a morning that has slightly less of something, though they couldn't say what. What they are feeling is the absence of a relationship they didn't know they were in. Because here is what the science slowly circles around, and what feels true beyond the science. The birds in your yard were not just receiving from you. You were receiving from them. The psychological research on human-nature connection is now substantial enough to be taken seriously. Studies from the University of Exeter found that people who regularly observe birds near their homes report significantly lower levels of stress, anxiety, and depression, not because of anything mystical, because the presence of living things, moving, responding, attending to the world with a focus and intensity that humans have largely outsourced to screens, does something to the nervous system that rest and silence alone cannot. The birds in your yard were giving you something every morning, something you may have called routine, or peace, or just background, but something that was, in the language of biology and psychology, genuinely meaningful. A form of connection to a world that exists entirely outside your own concerns. And on the day the feeder goes empty, that quiet gift pauses too. What no one tells you is that the birds are not just animals living near your house. They are participants in a living system that includes you, whether you intended it or not. The moment you began filling a feeder, you became part of a network. A relationship built in a language of consistency and return. A language birds understand better than most humans do. The crow that lands on your fence every morning and stares at you with those eyes that research suggests can recognize individual human faces, can distinguish between people who have been kind to them and people who have not, can hold that information across years, That crow is not scenery. It is a mind, looking back. The sparrow that waits on the branch 3 feet from the feeder every morning before you've even fully woken up, it is not waiting randomly. It is waiting for you. Specifically, individually, in the way that any living thing waits for someone who has become part of its world. And when you disappear from that world, even for 24 hours, the world adjusts. But it doesn't forget. The 24th hour arrives. A full rotation of the earth, one complete cycle of light and dark, and the feeder is still empty. In those final hours of the day, something remarkable happens in the trees around your yard. The birds that remain, the most sight-faithful ones, the regulars, the ones with the deepest investment in the reliability of your yard, do something that takes a moment to fully register. They roost closer to your yard than they might otherwise. Not inside it, not on the feeder, but near it, in the hedges at the edge of the property, in the upper branches of the trees that shade your fence, as if they are not ready, quite yet, to update their maps, as if they are giving you one more chance. And in that small, quiet act of lingering, which is not loyalty in the human sense, which is biology and memory and probability calculation, there is something that feels, to any person paying close enough attention, almost unbearably tender. Tomorrow morning, if you walk out before sunrise and fill the feeder before the light fully arrives, you will not be alone in the yard for long. They will come back. Not all of them immediately, not all at once. The hierarchy will reassert itself. The dominant species first, then the smaller birds working around them. The rhythms will rebuild. The yard will return to what it was, but something will have passed through it. A 24-hour question mark. A gap in the reliability of your presence that the birds have noticed and logged and will, in their own way, remember. You might not notice the difference. The yard will look the same. The feeder will be full. The birds will be back. But now you know what the yard looked like from inside the question. You know what the silence meant. You know that the chickadees and sparrows and the crow on the fence were not decorations in your life. They were participants, and you were participant in theirs. The relationship was always mutual. You just didn't know it yet. Most people walk past birds every day without thinking about what is looking back at them. What is tracking them? What is building, in a brain the size of a walnut, a detailed and accurate model of who they are, how they behave, whether they can be trusted? The birds in your yard have been studying you longer than you have been thinking about them. They know your schedule better than your coworkers do. They know which mornings you run late and which mornings you linger. They have noticed, in ways that leave no room for comfortable dismissal, that you exist, and they have chosen in whatever way a bird chooses anything to keep coming back. That is not nothing. In a world moving faster and louder and further from anything living, a bird that returns to your yard every morning, that chooses the predictability of your presence over the uncertainty of a world that offers no guarantees, is offering something quietly extraordinary. The question is whether you are paying attention. If you have ever watched a bird hesitate at an empty feeder and felt something you couldn't quite name, something between guilt and recognition, I would genuinely like to know. Tell me what happened in your yard. Tell me which bird came back first. Tell me whether, after learning all of this, the morning feels different to you than it did before. Because I think it might.